playing through Jake's story is a peculiar mix of good and bad, like a bit of Chris Redfield's campaign thrown in with a dash of Leon Kennedy's. One moment you'll be having a blast in a well-designed encounter, while the next you're thrown against a horrible level or quick-time event. It's almost as if each level in Jake's campaign is having an identity crisis, where it doesn't know exactly what it wants to be. What is most clear is that Jake's campaign is certainly the most diverse in its efforts, with each level having at least one major set piece, if not two. How well these are executed varies greatly, though. Fighting the giant monsters in Eastern Europe as Jake is a lot easier than as Chris due to the ease of mashing a button instead of waggling a stick. Limited visibility in a snowstorm followed by a finicky ride on a snowmobile, on the other hand, is more frustrating than engaging. The following helicopter fight can be a lot of fun until you're shoved into a QuickTime event. Stealthing through a hidden facility takes some getting used to, but otherwise is a lot of fun. Then the tank shows up and teams up with a camera to ruin everyone's day. Riding a motorcycle is awesome! Chainsaw motherfucker just won't die! It's an odd combination of highs and lows throughout each individual level, let alone an entire campaign. The same can be said for the different combat arenas and how they take into account Jake's proficiency in hand-to-hand combat. Melee combat isn't merely a button press, it is also its own weapon selection and provides Jake with even more combat maneuvers, or just allows him to punch people in the face a bit more efficiently. A lot of the locations are either designed for Jake to perform one-hit kills on foes, or are in tight enough spaces where melee combat is a logical option. In fact, melee combat is useful enough that ammunition can actually become overabundant instead of scarce, a problem never seen in Leon's or Chris's campaigns. At the same time, his melee combat is barely useful against some of the larger monster transformations, and certainly doesn't do as much damage or have as great an effect. As a result, there are a number of arenas where ammunition may become quite low or are just frustrating due to the presence of certain irritating enemies. You frustrating motherfucker, why don't you just die? Otherwise, it's just your usual gunfight, which, by this campaign, the player is either used to and better at, or is just plain tired of. Perhaps that's why there are so many more set pieces in Jake's campaign than all the others, and certainly helps keep the player invested in the game. In fact, while Chris Redfield's campaign may fit the overall design of the mechanics best, Jake's campaign may arguably be better simply because there's a lot more going on in each level. Unfortunately, that means there are as many chances to stumble as there are to shine. The real highlight of Jake's campaign is the Ustanak, who I'll just refer to as the big guy. Every fight with the big guy is designed around the fact that he is invincible. He can't die, so every encounter must focus on simply knocking him out of commission or avoiding him. The first fight with him could have easily gone awry due to the presence of other infected foes. However, they are not only kept at a small, manageable number, they do fight with the big guy when they're not actively attacking you. It keeps the situation a bit more dynamic while also making it manageable, allowing the player to spend more time focusing on luring the big guy by explosive barrels until he is defeated. The second encounter is another stealth section organized like a puzzle, where the player must sneak and hide until they can defeat one of the bugs acting as the big guy's eyes. It all ends with a final puzzle to keep them distracted, and then a QuickTime event that, surprisingly, allows the player some margin for error. The next time the player fights the big guy, it is with Leon and Helena. It's pretty much the same encounter as before when I discussed it in Leon's campaign video, and is just as enjoyable a second time around. Jake's final mission is probably the most enjoyable between each campaign, as it primarily involves fighting with the big guy instead of any unnecessarily long or challenging gunfights with minions or henchmen. Except for these regenerating f***holes, I swear you have to deal with them every time, and every time it f***ing sucks. The final battle primarily involves keeping your distance while plugging away as much ammo as necessary, concluding with a hand-to-hand fight that simply requires Jake to punch the bad guy until he falls back enough to trigger a QuickTime event. However, if you don't get it perfect, you'll find yourself in the boiling hot lava instead of drowning the big guy. Of course, seeing as this is Resident Evil 6, and there weren't nearly enough phases to that fight, Big and Ugly comes back one last time okay. I'm sorry, but that's just so funny looking. Anyway, one last bout of QuickTime events. So while the final fight with the big guy was also the least interesting, Jake's final level also manages to be the least frustrating between every campaign, and as a result the most satisfying. It's too bad all of his levels couldn't have been that way. In terms of gameplay, I feel like Jake and Sherry's could have been the best and, with a bit more work and polish, could have been enough to solely build Resident Evil 6 on. While some of its highs are certainly greater than those in Chris's campaign, however, there are certainly way too many lows as well. Jake's campaign is the only one to start out at the conflict in Eastern Europe, though it doesn't really shed too much light on the subject. He's working with a group of mercenaries that were given what he refers to as an energy booster. Not feeling its effects, he remarks they should ask for more money. This indicates that whatever is going on in Eastern Europe is in no way political, or might be disguised as being political, but is really the work of... Evil Ada. Further, Sherry Birkin, working with the government, already knows where to find Jake. In fact, the BSAA is already fighting a bunch of these mercenaries, indicating that the BSAA already knew what was happening, or at least knew to be here in full force. So we know Simmons was in some way working with Ada, and we see Evil Ada on the scene. Sherry's objective is to grab Jake, who has the antibodies to the infection, and take him back to her employers to create a serum. Evil Ada, however, is sending the big guy after Jake to catch him herself. Now, does everyone already know that Jake is Wesker's son? Sherry knows him by name as soon as she finds him, so the theory is that the government has been keeping tabs on him for some time now. In that case, was Jake part of Simmons' plan to create chaos and then deliver a cure to save everyone? It seems the only reason things are going tits up in Eastern Europe and Hong Kong are because he didn't want everyone to know that the Raccoon City incident was caused by Umbrella, even though it's already on public record. So what happened first? Did the mercenaries show up first? Did the BSAA show up first? Did everyone already know Jake was there? Or is he... I'm getting ahead of myself. These questions aren't intended to all be answered in Jake's campaign. All we know is that Simmons is Sherry's boss, he wants Jake because he has antibodies to the infection, and Evil Ada also wants him for some nefarious purpose. After that, the story is pretty straightforward. Sherry is trying to get Jake back to the government in order to create a cure for the infection. Jake, being the mercenary that he is, only agrees to it for a large sum of money. Of course, things change a bit over time. Jake learns that Sherry Birkin, who herself has a bit of virus in her due to her role in Resident Evil 2, also has healing properties. Each of them has ties to Umbrella, mutations, and the potential disasters brought on by madmen and misguided visionaries. They are, in a sense, the next generation. Jake and Sherry get captured and sent to a facility in Hong Kong for several months and manage to break out just as all hell is beginning to break loose. Once again, no explanation for what's causing all hell to break loose, though it can be expected that Simmons is once again behind it, possibly to distract from the real cause of the disaster in America by having a simultaneous outbreak in China. From here, Jake and Sherry continue to try and break free of the conflict and get Jake back to the government. Over time, Jake seems to soften towards Sherry and grow concerned for her well-being and even becoming protective of her. Once Sherry gets the truth from Simmons, she and Jake try to escape, only to be captured by Infected. They are then taken to the underwater facility where they encounter Chris and Piers, and Jake learns the truth, that Chris killed his father, Wesker. Now, Jake's reaction here doesn't make complete sense. Jake didn't even know his father, and while there may be frustration in never having been able to meet the man, there's no real emotional attachment. Jake should not be this angry that his father was killed, but should instead want answers. The most he gets is that Chris Redfield wasn't just following orders, but also had his own grudge against Wesker. This is strange behavior because no real attachment to Jake's father has been established. He doesn't know the man. That's simple. We don't know if he hates his father or would want to meet him someday. We don't know if he's apathetic. Jake has never asked many questions about the situation at all. Yet here he is angry at Chris because he killed the father he never knew existed and doesn't even know why. Jake doesn't know at all about where he came from, but his personality seems to be of one that doesn't care anyway. He's learned to live past it. On the whole, there's not much to Jake and Sherry's story. However, I still feel a strong attachment to these characters due to their experience together. They are each a legacy of Umbrella and Raccoon City, and furthermore...
You saved me.
Jake doesn't mean Sherry saved him lightly, or you saved me from that pit of lava beneath us. He means it as in, you saved me from being a selfish and self-destructive jerk with nothing to live for. While this character growth wasn't exactly masterfully executed, we've seen it in enough subtle ways throughout the game between the two that you can see a relationship developing. I also liked Sherry's more innocent demeanor covering up a true strength of character. She's a strong woman in that she has a mission, she'll get it done, and isn't afraid to get her hands dirty, but she doesn't exude that typical I'm a badass woman personality. Her motivations are explained more clearly than Helena's, and she's not a complete sexual fantasy of a femme fatale like Ada. She's a good example of a strong female character in a video game. I would love to see these two characters again in the future. I'd love for Resident Evil 7 to focus on Sherry and Jake and what happens next. Unfortunately, all we really get is that Sherry is back to work for the government and Jake is off doing stuff. That the game provides no closure for where these characters are personally, that it drops a thank you for saving me and then has them go their separate ways, is perhaps the only problem I have with their story. Any nonsense is a fault of the overarching storyline, but otherwise Jake's campaign is a story about he and Sherry together. Hopefully we'll get to see more of that in the next game.